let's say int, I don't know I haven't been doing the syntax, but let's say int x equal to 1 or something like this, right, in Java. And then there is a wait function, I guess, all right? And then if I do something else, int y equal to something, right? Now, this wait function really stops the execution. It will not move to the next line in Java, right? JavaScript is non-blocking, which means if I have a set timeout, so set timeout is like a wait function for JavaScript. If I have a set timeout, then it really doesn't really wait right then. It keeps moving to the next line, and whenever that timeout is over, then it executes that particular function. So that's why JavaScript it's very special. So for example, let's write something in JavaScript. So if I say let x, well, instead of I'll just say console log. Console log.
I have a doubt.
Sure.
Yeah, so non-blocking means you mean asynchronous, right?
Non-blocking means that it doesn't wait for anything. So let's say if I have
asynchronous behavior.
Yeah, asynchronous behavior really means that synchronous would be like you do something in logical order, right? The order it's defined. Asynchronous means you do out of order. So if something you have to wait, you would do it later on, but you keep moving on to things that
it doesn't block anything, right? So suppose we can say it as non-blocking.
Yeah, so non-blocking, which means that it doesn't wait for anything. Okay, so let me give an example, and then we can talk about it. So if I have a console log 1 and console log 2, right? If I run this, obviously it would run 1 and 2, right? Because in the order it's defined. But there is a function called set timeout. Okay, set timeout, I think it's this way. Set timeout basically saying that, okay, run after given time. And usually set timeout has a function. You have to pass a function as an argument. And you also need to provide time when this function is going to run. So if I say I want to run it after 1 second, then I have to provide like a millisecond, which is 1 second is 1000 millisecond, right? So set timeout has two things: function that I want to run and the time when I want to execute this function. So here I'm just going to simply say I can move this log to here. Okay, so this function basically just logs this thing out, right? And then I can say log 3, right? So this is very important to know that it would run first console log 1. Then when this line comes in, it knows that it has to wait for some time. So what it will do, it will say, okay, I'm going to wait here in the side while I continue doing this. So it will first execute 3, and then when 1 second is over, then it will execute this. Okay, so if I look at this, and this is also a very important interview question, and I'll show you in a minute what they can ask you. So as you can see, it's 1, 3, and 2, right? Even though it's defined 1, 2, and 3. So what really happens is this. there is a thing called execution stack. Have I covered this by any chance? I don't remember. The execution stack?
I think you did in Promises channel.
Oh, okay.
I saw you recording.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. But let's just cover it again so that, quickly. So, yeah, so you have, let's say, 1 here, right? Console log 1. Then you have console log 3. So the things that will go on execution stacks are the things that I can run right now. And things that I can run later on would go in a separate queue. Okay. And so this is a separate queue. So this is my stack here. And this is my queue. Okay. And the way stack works is the first thing that goes on gets executed. Stack is like, what is it called? Last in, first out, right? So first it would put 1 and it would execute it. Then it would put 2. Well, there should be 3 here. And there should be 2 here, right? So this is how it gets executed. Okay, so first is the 1 comes in. Well, 3 is not here. All right, so first 1 comes in, then it's executed. So it prints out. Then 2 gets in the queue because it has to wait for 1 second. Then 3 comes on a stack. Okay, and then it gets executed, and then 2 gets executed, right? So when the entire stack is empty, then only it will take anything from the queue. So let's say here, if I am printing 1 to 100, it will still wait for everything that is on the execution stack to be executed before it actually touches anything on a set timeout. Even though, let's say if I put it 0 here, it will still do it because 0 timeout, which means still wait, doesn't mean execute right away. So this is an interview question. They will give you something like this. So it's an illusion, right? So you might think, oh, it's a 0 timeout, so it will run right away, but it's not the case because it goes on the execution queue, right? So yeah. Any question on this? That's why it's called non-blocking. Okay. So why does the closure where does the closure come in the picture? Well, the closure comes in the picture because if I have something, let's say if I'm using here, let's take the same example. Let's say if I say x equal to 1, right? And then I'm going to console log x here. Now, what happens is that, and I'm just going to put, let's say, 1 second. Now, this executes x equal to 1, and then it has to wait for 1 second before it actually prints out the x. Now, by the time when it really executes x, there is a possibility that this thing is out of scope. Okay, I could be returning this function or something like that, right? So it really needs to hold this x somewhere so it executes when it really executes later time. So what it does, whenever it becomes asynchronous like this, it will say, well, oh, I need to execute this function 1 second later, but I better store anything that I'm executing, so it knows that it needs X to print, right? So it will hold X inside here as a closure. So that's why the closure is needed, because of the asynchronous nature of the JavaScript, you need to hold things when you're gonna do something later on. Okay.
So it won't be in the scope, Hemant. I mean, when you're doing console.log of X, it will be the scope, right?
No, in this case, it will be in the scope.
Then what is the need to hold X there? I didn't get the point.
Okay, so let me give you another example, simpler example. So if I have a for loop, now let's put the set timeout inside and let's use I here. Okay. Now I'm going to say console log next. Okay. So what do you think it will print? Well, let's just make this 4. What do you think it would print in this case?
First, next will print, Hamel.
Okay. So, and then what?
And then 0, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. So, right now, I is what?
0.
Right? When it can, and I has a block scope, right?
Oh yes, it's so, in the for loop, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't exist beyond this for loop, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if my execution goes, does it exit here? No, right?
No.
So how come it executes this first and then my next comes, and somehow here I'm printing 0, 1, 2, and 3, because it's outside the scope already, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you mean the console log next is not related with the for loop. I mean, both are different execute. I mean,
yes. So the 1, 2, and 3, 4 will execute after the next. It's not actually executing here because of the set timeout, right? So by the time next comes, I doesn't even exist.
Because out of scope, because execution engine will start from console.log of next, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now after the next, there is no I. So, but it still prints 1, 2, 3, 4, which is I. That is because what it does, it remembers this function, and it would hold 1. So they will have 3 functions, 4 functions. The one that holds 0, the one holds 2, 1, 2, and 3 and 4. 3. So it will have like 3 functions that is inside. So what really happens is this. So let's first print this and then see, right, what happens. Okay, so first next gets printed, then 0, 1, 2, 3 gets printed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is what really happened. So let's look at this, right? So first thing would come is this one would come in the picture, right? But it says, well, I cannot execute this right now because I still have to wait for 1 second. So it gets in the queue, right?
Hmm.
Then the 2 comes, it will get in the queue, and then the queue is actually first in, first in, first out, right?
Yes.
So it will be like this actually. Well, think of there 1, 2, 3 actually, not 0, 1, 2, but there is like let's say 0 here, right? Then comes next. So the next comes here, and then next get printed, right? So then this would actually print first. Actually, these are not 0, 1, 2, 3. These are actually functions that prints 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So you have 4 functions actually. One would do console log 1, CL, I'm just gonna say CL1, right? And this one would have CL0. This one would have CL2, and this one would have CL3. So you'll have 3 functions, and then when the second finishes, then it will execute 0, 1, 2, and 3. By the time it's outside the scope, so it is holding those things in a closure anyway. Got it?
So it is holding a function in a closure, right?
No. The closure is actually nothing but, think of this. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a practical example. All right.
Okay.
Let's say you are given to clean the. You're given a, let's say, um, a vacuum cleaner, right? And then
Mhm.
you said clean 1 hour from now on. Okay, and you are inside the house. Now you have to wait for 1 hour, right? And then somebody say, well, you actually need to go to your friend's house. So you know you're gonna be in your friend's house. So what do you do? You take the vacuum cleaner with you, right, to your friend's house. And when it says clean 1 hour later, you will clean your friend's house, basically, right? Because if you go to your friend's house and if you don't have the vacuum cleaner, then you cannot really clean, right? Because vacuum cleaner is not available. So think of this: your house is your scope, like your for loop. Uh, and then by the time 1 hour, you are already outside the house, right? Because you left. So you need to bring the vacuum cleaner with you. So these numbers 0, 1, 2, 3 are actually nothing but a vacuum cleaner. So you take it outside with you, and then when the time comes, you execute in a completely different scope, right? So you're executing in this scope here, right? Even though the 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3 are defined here in this for loop. It's a kind of hard to understand concept, but I want you to visualize this way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and we'll look at what it. So basically,
So
the vacuum.
practically, we must suppose say like angular frame. I mean angular, 2, 3. What angular 2 and 4.
Yeah.
So internally they use closures and all because we never like get a chance to work, to see closures and all. I
Yeah,
mean,
it does use closure, and then that's why you need to understand it, because it will be using it, but if you don't understand it, then you will be really confused why Angular is working this way.
yeah,
Okay. Angular uses, so I think React, Angular, they all use closure inside. For example, promises. You can define promises in Angular, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and the promise is using closure, right? Because when you make a promise, say I'm going to do something, and then by the time uh, when when the data really returns back, you you may be completely outside that scope, right? So
Okay. But I'm still like confused with here. I understand the scope because forward is one scope,
mhm,
and this is console log. Next is outside the execution.
mhm.
But if you take promises, right? So how we will do promises? We will do Ajax call.
So let's do a
Uh,
promise here, right? Let's do a promise. So let's say let uh, p equal to new promise, right? Something like this, right?
resolve
And
reject. Yeah.
it will have two arguments, right?
Resolve and
Yeah, resolve and reject, right? It will have two arguments, and these are actually a callback functions, right?
yes.
And then uh, what it will have, what it will do inside the promise, that it will um, it will have some URL, right? That
Yeah.
it's going to call, right? So let's look at it. So if I look at the promise, I'm gonna take an example from here.
I think it's better to see MDN maybe.
Yeah, but I'm trying to see a good example where there's a URL. Um, okay, okay. So let's say this is an example. Okay, uh, but there's no URL. Okay, let's just go MDN. Oh. Yeah, this is just doing it. Set timeout.
Yeah, here we have.
Okay, here. Well, this is still. Okay, let's just say here's my example, right? So I have a URL, right? And so this is a function, and my URL only exists within this function, right? Okay.
Yes.
XHR also lives within these functions and everything. So what happens is that when I execute this function, it just creates a new promise. Yeah. And this promise basically what so the thing about a promise is when it executes, there's a then function, right?
Yes.
Like here, like then, and then it actually, uh, whenever it executes it, it basically um, this gets executed, right? So if there is anything inside here that I've done, uh, I can pass it here. So, but how does it magically happen? How does it automatically comes here, right? Because this code gets executed right away, and then inside there's some promise that waits until that data comes back, and even this thing actually waits, right? uh, and by then actually everything is, let's say if I technically I can copy this and okay, well there's a timeout, but let's say if there was some URL, right? And I have some another, let's say this is a JavaScript HTML page, and it has to this promise basically gets the there's some element. Let's have an element here, um, div, and it has an ID. Let's say called data, right? Now, what I can do is when the promises actually finishes, then I can say, let's say if it's a jQuery. I don't know if you guys familiar with jQuery syntax, but I can say id dot html is I forgot the syntax, but basically data or something, right? Let's say this is getting the data back. So what happens, I define a promise, then I say when and then this is actually nothing but getting some data. Let's say call ajax call to get some data, right? And then when the data happens, then you just say resolve with the data, right? So this, let's look at how does this happen. So if I go here in the stack and a queue, and here I can actually add something else. Console log something, one, or next, or something like this, right? So here what will happen? First, it defines a promise, right? So it will put the promise here, right? Which means it executes the promise right away, but it doesn't resolve and reject, right? It waits for the resolve function, so basically to return something, right? Then this function also comes in, right? But this only runs when this resolve runs, so it's not going to run right away, but it will basically it will be holded inside the promise, okay? And then the next comes here, so next comes here, then it gets executed, so that next get outputted. Then whenever the data comes back, the resolve gets called. When the resolve gets called, it will call the then function, okay? And then when the then function gets called, it basically sets the HTML page so that ID will have the data, right? Now, what if the URL was here? So I'm actually trying to get the data from google.com. And here, I can say get Google, get URL, right? Okay. So when it actually happens, this URL may not even exist, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So anything that you are using outside the scope may not exist when this gets resolved, and that may not exist when this. I can also do something like this. I can say let x equal to 1 or something, right? And then when the data comes in, I can say data equal to data plus x, right? Now x is 1, but when the promise resolves, the X won't be available because it will be long gone, right? But it still holds inside.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another example where it's
So basically, suppose if interviewer asks what is a closure, or what can we say in a brief, I understand the example like.
So there are two answers. Okay, uh, some interviewer are see usually I would say a lot of interviewers don't even know what closure is when they ask. Okay, so I prepared two answers. The first answer is that um, because the asynchronous nature of JavaScript, or you can say non-blocking nature of JavaScript, uh, if you have a function that will be executed at some later time when the scope is not available, uh, the variable that are used inside that function will be held as a closure. So when it really executes it outside the scope, it will have it, right? That's the first answer. The second answer is, and you can give that for loop example. Okay. The second answer is um, when a function returns to another function. So let's look at that example. And the second answer is the probably a lot of people are looking for. But I would say you give both answers so at least they might understand something new that they probably don't know, right?
Function. The other function is a closure handle.
Yeah. So let's say if I have a counter, and this is a function, okay, and I have let I equal to 0, okay. So this is a variable that it's inside this function, right? And I can say print. So I can say const print equal to and I can well, I don't even have to. I can just simply return it actually. Return I, right? So let's try to understand this. So I have a counter, and what happens when I execute this counter? What's going to happen
here? 0.
No, it will return this function.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So if I console log this, I would get this function back, right? Okay.
Yes.
Now, what if I execute this function? So if I want to execute this function, all I'm just going to do is this, right? So it returns it, and I execute it right away. So now what I'm going to get?
Now it will get 0.
Yeah. Well, I don't need to have this console log because the console log is inside there. Right? So I'll get a 0, right? How come I get a 0 here? Because 0 is only available in this function, and the scope of I is only belong to this function, right?
Yeah.
But somehow when I execute it outside, I still get it. And that is because, let's look at it. So if I console dir, and look at it. Because it's a anonymous function, I haven't given a name. I would see the scope, and I would see closure here, and I would see I inside here. So this function that is being returned, it holds the value of I inside, which is closure. So now if I call this function, it will say, okay, my I is nothing but, it will get the I from the closure. So if an interview asks you this question, what is a closure, you can give both examples. One is a for loop example that I gave you, and the second example is this. Most of the people would accept this answer. So when a function returns a function, which in this case it does, the returning function would actually holds all the variable that it requires to execute. So it needs to have I, right? So what it will do, this function would hold I as a closure inside. So let's say if I have another variable, let's say O equal to 1, right? But if I run this, I won't see O inside here. I will only see I. Why? Because it doesn't need O, this function. Now, what if I do two closure I and console log I and console log O? Now it will think, okay, I need both, right? So now if you look at the closure, I have both I and O. Make sense?
Yeah. So it's stored in like in a heap, or like
yeah, it will be stored on a heap probably, because it will hold the function in a heap.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have closures in all functional programming languages like Scala, and all those languages?
I think
Because what I grab from this is like because it's a functional programming. We have a scoping. We have in functional programming, we have these scoping issues and all.
Yeah.
So I think we have in all functional programming languages, I guess, closures. I don't understand.
So initially, closure came from there was a language called Haskell. Haskell is a there was a guy named Haskell Curry, and he created this language called Haskell, and I believe he was the first one to use closure. I'm not sure if every functional programming language would have closure. Only a functional programming language that that is, I guess, asynchronous in nature would have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like if you have a it would be beneficial if you have a session on JavaScript memory model, the memory stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think it might solve the memory, and also concurrent. It's also single threaded, but though people say a concurrent.
Yeah, the concurrency model, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. I think what I can do is, once we have, I think a lot of people, since they went on a vacation, what I'll do next time when we have a full house.
Execution model, and all those stuff. Execution, the stack, the memory, and all those stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
It will give some clear about the language. While learning Java, I learned through JVM how JVM is doing stuff.
Yeah,
Like that.
virtual machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Bhuvneshwar is asking, can we get another example of closure? So have you guys seen a curry function?
No, Hemal.
Okay. So that's the example I wanted to give, a curry function. So, and this is also another common interview question, um, where they would ask you something like this: um, have a function called add, and it takes two arguments. Okay. Uh, Usually, add function takes two argument, right? And then it would add those two numbers and return something, right? Uh, but here, I'm going to have only one argument called a. And what it would do is add function will return another function. And this function, I can give an argument b. And then I can return a plus b. Okay? So when I execute this function with the first argument, so I can say add 1, what it would give me is this function. Okay, so let's look at it, what it would give me. Console log add 1. Well, let me just do dir here so I can see more. Okay, and as you can see, it will have closure inside, which is a equal to 1, right? Okay, and if I look at the body of this function, for that I would just do console log. So the body of this function is nothing but a function where it returns a plus b. Now we know that there is a b because it's passing this argument, but where is a? It's getting it from the closure here automatically. So it holds a inside, and then whatever b you pass, it will add it to a. So now, if I pass another argument, I can actually do something like this as well. I can say let second equal to a. So my a is this, and then I would just say second, I would pass 2, right? Console log. So the second function already holds 1 inside. So then it would give me 3. Or I can simply do this. Instead of console log second, I can simply do this. Console log add 1. So that would have a 1 closure, and add 2. So I would have 2 closure. So then it would also give me 3. This guy asked me this question. He said, and this is from VMware. He asked me this question, say, if there is a function called func, and they are passing something like this, 3, and it outputs 9. Okay, and the same function I can pass 2, 3, and 1, and it outputs 5. So he said, can you write this function that does this?
Yeah, first argument should be, should add up, and the result should be the result should multiply with the third argument.
Yes. The funny thing was he used a minus in one of them, so it was very difficult. But the answer is this. So the function func equal to, I would have A, right? B, I don't even have to do this. B, C, A plus B multiplied by C. This is the answer.
Yeah. Does he expect to use some closure, something,
No, it does use a closure, right? In this case.
Yeah, when we call, yes. I mean, like he expect you to explain,
No, I think if you know this answer, that they already assume that you know closure anyway, right? There are two kinds of question where this is like a more math plus. This becomes very difficult when if I ask, let's say something like this. So I think he used minus. So he said 1 multiplied by 2 minus 3. So this will be minus 1 or something like this. Okay. And 2 multiplied by 3 minus 2. So it's like 4. That becomes very difficult by just looking at it. So you have to do some math. So it was a math question plus curry function, right? And Chandra, did you get this one?
Yeah. But what is the difference in curry function? Like it's like closure, right?
Yeah. And then this is a short form, but I mean, you can because in a arrow function you don't have to return anything. So this is basically nothing but this.
Function returning a the curry function.
Say it again.
I mean, function returning a function is a curry function.
No, curry function is it when you call a function with this in this argument where you do something with one argument, then hold that inside, and then do something with the second argument, and do something with the third argument. Okay, this is called currying. You could be using like the first example, okay. And I'll give you another example as well, which is also asked more. So technically, this is the longer form of what I wrote, right?
Yeah, I understood that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is basically curry function. Another question is something like this. So what if I want to have a function that does this, and at the same time it can do this, and they both should give 3. Anybody know how to do this? It's the same function.
You mean it should give the result 3, Hemant?
Yeah, both should give 3.
Plus 2, right? A plus, I mean, first argument plus second argument. Oh, for both.
It's a one function that does both.
Actually, in the first function, like function 1 of function 2. Okay.
Anybody?
You mean you need to use the same function to execute this summon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a very common interview question also.
Yeah, returning, take in suppose, function A, take one argument, returning the next argument, the B, that is 2. So when we call it from outside, it's like A plus, I mean, the first argument plus second argument. You can, I mean, in the third return statement, I guess.
Yeah, so basically this is how it works. So I can build this function.
Yeah, one whole function, next inside one function and second function, and calling the main function at last.
So this is how the best answer is. So I'll just put an n as like a spread operator. Let me make it a right thing because okay. So I make it a spread operator, and then if I say if n, because if I have a 2 argument, then n1 would be undefined, right? Or you can just say if not. If it's not, if there is no second argument, then return a function where you can just do n 0 plus b, right? Else return a plus b. Hold on. Okay. Did I miss anything here? Yeah. And so if I do console log, they should actually return. sorry, this should be n0. Otherwise it's n1. Then you get 3, right? So what I'm saying is, if there are 2 arguments, then just simply add those arguments. If it's only 1 argument, then return a function. So the first argument would be, this would be like returning a function. This would be simply adding 2 numbers. You can also, I think, do it this way. You can do like A and C, and if there is no C, then it's A, otherwise A plus C, right? This also works. Any question on this one? Yeah, these are very important interview questions, because usually I've noticed that you'll get one of these closure questions. So either you get that for loop question, uh, function returning a function, a query function, okay. And there is another one, which is I'm gonna show you. So another function would be like, can you build a counter where I can do like this, add 1, and it would add 1, and I can say remove or subtract 2, and then I can say add 2, and this should give me 1, right? Do you guys know how to build this? Something like this. Have you guys used this before? Okay, I'm assuming nobody have used it. So, okay, so the way to build this, we can use a closure. And so here, we can build a counter. So let's build a counter. And this one, let's say it's a function. Well, you have to, let's say if they give you something like this. There are two ways to do it. Let's say if it's a function, and then you do something like this, right? So in this case, this is a function, okay? And inside you can have some sort of variable, I or something, okay? And I'm gonna initialize to 0. Now what I'm gonna do is, I need two methods. And eventually I would need another method called print or something, which prints the variable out. So add would add 1 to it, subtract would subtract 2, add would add again 2, and then print would print out the variable. Okay. One way to do it is I build this functions. So I can say const add equal to, this, and then I would just simply say this add basically you know adds I. It has an argument, right? X. So I can say I plus equal to X. So it adds X to I. Subtract is a very similar function. But instead of adding, it subtracts it, right? And then print basically returns I. It doesn't have any argument, right? And then I would return add subtract and print. Or the new syntax is you don't even have to do this. You can simply do this: add, subtract, and print. Okay. So now, another thing is, if I call add one time, how can I call it again? So in this case, I'm calling it multiple times. Let's say print just consoles out. Right? So here, let's call this and see if it works. Let's first call add and print. Okay. Print of undefined. Let's see, there's something missing here. Oh yeah. I cannot. Okay. Do you guys know how to fix this? So everybody getting this concept? Indra, Chandra?
Trying to digest.
So it's a very simple concept. So I created a function counter, right? And then I created 3 private variable inside, which is basically functions, right? Add, subtract, and print. And then all I'm doing is returning this object which has these 3 methods, right? But the only thing is this variable let I. Now this is going to be preserved as a closure inside this counter. So if I just execute this without even doing anything, let's say, okay, let's see what it prints. So it prints this function which has these three methods, right? And it holds, every function will hold that closure I equal to 0, as you can see, because every function has to store this closure separately. Okay, so now if I simply call add, because this counter, whatever is returning, it has add, right? So I can call add. If I run this, because add doesn't return anything, first of all. So if I simply return this, means execute this function and return itself. And then if I print, then if I look at it again, and this is a very important concept. One of the issue here is that, because this is an arrow function.
The semicolon.
Which one?
After the curly braces.
Which line?
I mean, all the three add, subtract, and print for arrow functions, they should be semicolon at the ending.
Semicolon. Which? Oh, here you mean?
No, on the top itself. After which add, subtract, and print after.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it will JavaScript figure out. I think the problem is with the arrow function. Okay, so what I have to do is convert into like a regular function, because the problem with the arrow function is this keyword. Or I can do this. Instead, I can say return counter. Does it work? Yep, it works. Now if I just do print, it should now print this I, hopefully. Otherwise I have to convert into print is not a function. Yeah, I have to probably convert into a regular function. I cannot use this. I think print might be fine, but the other function needs to be converted. And then I would say return this. I haven't done this one. Well, let's just convert this into a function as well. Okay. I don't need to. I don't need to return this. Why is it giving defined? Let's look at what it is here up to here. So it is add function. It does have, oh, why it doesn't have closure inside? the counter is a closure. Oh, I cannot return. Oh, sorry, I cannot. I have to return this. I cannot return a counter. But why? The only thing is why I is not. Do you guys see it? Why I is not. Hold on. Something is wrong here. Okay, so we gotta add. Inside there is a scope. Closure is not a number. Course is not a number because this is pretty stupid because I was supposed to pass a number. That's why. Now but it should have 1 inside. Okay. That was a problem. If I do print, now it should print 1. Yeah, it's prints 1. Okay, so now if I do, let's say, subtract 2, it should be 1 minus 2, so it should give me minus 1, right? And I can add, let's say 3, and it should give me 2 now. Okay. Everybody digested this one? So this is a real interview question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a few people asked me this in an interview. This was some time ago, but and then here you can actually explain the closure because you can say, oh yeah, each function has a closure, which is I here, right? And return this is nothing but return this is nothing but, you know, I'm returning back the whole thing so that I can chain this. So this is also called method chaining. If you have heard of method chaining, this is method chaining as well. And this is pretty important because if you look at like Angular or React, you would see the syntax where they can chain arguments like this, right? And that is because this trick, they can return this from each function. So what add does, it adds this whatever argument is to I, and then it returns the whole object. The same thing with subtract. Okay, print doesn't return because print, I just want to print the value, right? So after print, I cannot chain because that's the last thing. Any question on this one? Bhuvneshwari, you got it? Yeah. Also, if you want to do chaining, this is using closure, but where you have a function which you execute. That's why I'm executing counter and then adding it. But I can create a counter. Let's say const counter equal to a regular object, right? And it can have methods add, then I can have subtract, and I can have print. This is more easier. I mean, if you know, so this is a regular object, and you have to define I here as, let's say, 0, right? Now what you do is add basically have some argument, and then you can say this dot I plus equal to x. And similarly, subtract, you can say this dot I minus. Here you have to use this because it's an object, so it's this dot I, right? And print simply says just a console log I. Well, I have to say this dot I. Okay. So here I don't have to execute this. The other one was a function which is returning a function. This one is an object itself. And here also I have to do this, return this, because if I want to chain, always remember, if you want to chain, you have to return this. Okay, so I have the same thing, but instead of now a function, I just have an object. Okay, so now if I run this, I would get 2, the same way I get it in before. Any question on this one? So if you don't have to use a closure, you can use this as well, which is much simpler. All right. So the other one was executing a function and returning an object. Here I just have an object. Okay. So yeah, so this is called method chaining. So again, as we looked at 4 things, right? How closure in a for loop works, how closure in a returning function, how closure works when you do a curry function, right? Where you keep returning functions. Each function returns another function. And also here, you can do method chain the method by returning this from each function. And I would say, you know, practice these 3 things, because if you go for an interview, you will get one of these questions. Almost like a 50% of the times, interviewed ask one of these questions. So if you can practice this, you can guarantee % of your job, right? That you can pass this. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Any question on this? So this is pretty much all about closures. And to practice this, I would suggest, you know, oh, another one, another question, that very famous one that a lot of people ask, right? Remember that we did the function loop. So we did this const, let's say, they would have something like this. Let's say const array equal to 1, 5, 3, something like this, and a 9. And they would do the same thing. So they would have a loop for let I equal to 0, I less than array dot length I plus plus, and then they would do set timeout, and inside they would have a function, right? Because set timeout takes a function, or simply they would say console log, and they would use some sort of like a template string or something. Index is I, and value is array I. And the timeout is maybe 0 seconds. So they would say, what would it print? Now here, instead of let, they would have var. This is a very tricky question. Have you seen anything like this in an interview, or Chandra?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I didn't say.
Okay. Do you know the answer to this question? Okay, so the answer, it's really weird. Okay. Let's look at it and let's understand why. And they would also ask how to solve this. So if I run this, now let me just go. You would get basically four times you will get this. Index 4 value undefined, 4 times. That's why it says 4, means it's a repeating value.
Oh yeah.
Now the question is, why is it giving you 4 and undefined?
There's something with the var and let, right?
Yeah.
The scope issues with var and
yeah,
let.
yeah. I mean, you can go deep inside understanding this thing, because var is like does a hoisting. It's almost like this. It's almost like this, var I equal to 0, right? Because of the function scope. So it var is available throughout here, right? So even if you run it here, it will basically change. So what happens is that first the I is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. And the last time it would change it to 4 because it has to check the length, right? So it would just say 4, and then it would hold that 4 inside as a closure. However, the value won't be available. So that's why undefined. So you can fix it simply by just doing let. Okay. And then you get, this 0, 1, 2, 3. Or there is another way where you can do like immediately a no function expression. something like this.